This is a ranking of the top 5 katanas in Shadow of the Erdtree. And the list might surprise you because the very popular Sword of Night Shadow Katana is not number 1 on this list. So let me dive straight into it and start justifying why that's the case, starting with number 5. The Great Katana. This is the only katana on the list that doesn't have a unique Ash of War weapon skill. But that doesn't mean it isn't special in its own way, because you can get this bad boy in the first 2 minutes of the DLC, and seeing as it is really strong compared to lots of the other non-katana weapons in the game, you definitely get a lot of bang for your buck here. And it's unique amongst the other katanas in the DLC because you can play any way you want with this one, because you can use any Ash of War with it. Still, it does rank at the bottom of the list for the katanas we'll be talking about today. So let's discuss some of the things that I don't like, starting with the Ash of War that it comes with. So it's called Overhead Stance, and it raises the katana up in the air and holds it there until you attack with either a light or a heavy attack. And when you light attack, it attacks once, and if you heavy attack, it strikes 3 times in quick succession. Now, with this Ash of War, you've got decent range, like it's okay, but it also feels like it doesn't have enough range to justify using it in anything other than completely ideal circumstances. And an example of that might be when you're not 100% if you're going to actually land all 3 of those attacks, right? Like there's lots of moments in the game where you're facing quick moving enemies and there's just no guarantee of actually landing your hits. And on top of that, it eats into your stamina bar a fair bit. So if you don't have like 40 plus endurance, then you're going to run out of stamina after doing 2 heavy attacks with overhead stance. Now, to its credit, it doesn't really consume much FP and it doesn't use more when using a heavy attack, so it's perfect if you don't have high FP. As far as damage output goes for the overhead stance, it's okay, I guess, but in my view, it really could be better. And I did try to solve this with Rolana's Cameo Talisman, which enhances attacks executed after maintaining the same stance for a couple of seconds. But having to do that is just fiddly, it's janky, it's annoying, and if a boss is coming at you, it might be a bit scary to do. And honestly, the damage boost that it gives you when you do that isn't really worth the time that you took just standing there doing nothing, waiting for it to finish. So I don't know if it's really that worthwhile. But one alternative option you could use is increasing your attack power with subsequent attacks by using the Millicent Prosthesis Talisman or the Rotten Winged Sword Insignia. Both of those will give you a boost for this Ash of War. So as much as there's things that are somewhat lacking with this katana, I want to make it absolutely clear, it's still pretty damn good, okay? Like I said, you can get it super early in the DLC. It's stronger than a lot of other weapons in the game. If you don't know where to find it, I've got a whole video explaining exactly where it is and where you can get all the other katanas as well. So click the link in the description or on screen for that right now. And I think that you should basically treat this as a weapon that you try to sort of adapt to the build that you're constructing at a given time, right? It's not a narrow one-trick pony, but rather if you swap out the kind of mid Ash of War that it's got and you make it a little bit more custom, then it can act as kind of a jack of all trades in some ways. And even just ignoring Ash of War for a second, it also hits pretty hard just at base. Like your regular attacks are pretty damn strong. A nice thing about it on top of all that is that this great katana scales with dex and strength, and it also has bleed, build-up, and damage, and you're going to see that as a common theme across everything on this list, so that doesn't make it better or worse than any of the other katanas, but it does just add to katanas being an OP weapon type. And to prove this, here's me against Melania, and you can see how much bleed damage that I'm able to do with just a couple of hits here, and I then called in a Mimic to see how much damage I could do in a short period of time, and just look how much I chunked her for. Like, this thing is pretty OP if you're not worrying about the mid Ash of War. And this isn't even with me scaling it with Dex and Strength. I actually leveled up Arcane for more bleed damage here, and so this is what I mean. Like, you can lean into the Dex and Strength angle, but the weapon is versatile enough where you could also just lean into Arcane and get really hard-hitting bleed for easy boss kills. So that's the Great Katana. It's decent, but it's not the best. And every other katana on this list has a unique Ash of War that really outclasses the one on this one. So let's talk about some of those other katanas now. And if you're enjoying the video, drop a like on it. Number 4, the Star-Lined Sword Katana. This one is great if you're a fan of magic, if you're a magic user and you love running sorceries. The other katanas on this list will be much less suited to you if you're a fan of that playstyle, but this one is pretty damn good. It scales with dex, but unlike the others on this list, it also scales with intelligence. So Moonveil can move over. There's a new personal favorite magic katana in town, and I think it slaps. I really like this one. Now, as I mentioned earlier, this has a unique Ash of War. You can take a look at it. It says it in the item description. It's maybe a little easy to miss at first, but when you check it out, it says it has Onzi's Line of Stars. And if you attack 3 times in a row, it actually has a special triple combo attack as well. So just to demonstrate that, the first attack does this, then the second attack does this, but the third one does this. This makes it super fun to just wail against packs of enemies, and overall, I think it's a great complement to any kind of sorcery build that deals high single target damage, or just a sorcerer with range, really. That said, you are going to probably start running into issues if you try to use Onzi's Line of Stars for every single attack against every enemy type. Like, you probably don't want to spam it against one of those big stinky lobsters, because you're going to get stunned mid-attack pretty frequently, and then you'll just take damage for no reason. Now, the last thing I want to say about the triple combo attack is it's just awesome when you can pull it off. It's just that you can't necessarily always actually pull it off. Like, you won't be able to complete the combo pretty often because there are just a lot of bosses that are just going to attack you too frequently to pull the combo off. But that said, if you really do understand the moveset of whatever boss you're fighting, you may find that you can kind of strategically pick a good time to strike and try and get your combo in. And the good news is that if you're able to do that, right, like the skill ceiling requirement is there, but if you're able to, it deals a huge amount of damage, and it has the benefit of the bleed effect that I also mentioned the Great Katana comes with. So who knows? Maybe there's a world where you could scale Int and Arcane, maybe? I mean, would that even be worth it? You tell me, leave a comment down below. So overall, the Starline Sword, it's got a unique Ash of War. It's really strong in certain situations, but even so, it's still outclassed by some of the other ones on this list. Number 3. The Sword of Night Shadow Katana. Now, this might cause some uproar, because I know everybody loves this thing, and I gotta say, it's awesome. Like, it's so damn cool, and the quest for it is also pretty gnarly, and that makes it even cooler in my opinion. So I think a lot of people probably assumed this would be number 1 on the list, but there's actually some even cooler stuff coming later in the video, so stay tuned for those. For now, let's talk about the Sword of Night. Like I said, the quest to get it is a fun quest. It's just cool in general. The weapon itself is awesome. It has a crazy cool aesthetic. I made a full guide on exactly how to get it that was like over 10 minutes long because it was so intense. Like, some of the other katanas on this list take like 30 seconds to get or 1 minute. So it really just goes to show that this one means business. So let's talk a little bit about its unique Ash of War, right? I mentioned that all the rest of the katanas on this list have a unique one. This one is called Witching Hour Slash. And it's nice because the regular moveset for this katana is really short range, but Witching Hour Slash takes the range issue and completely gets rid of it. And if you check out the range here, when it's fully charged up, you can see that it really is massive. Now, you might think, okay, well, I don't have to charge it up every time, right? When it's not fully charged, it unleashes a triple shadow attack that is much less risky. Like, you're just pouring a lot less time into charging, but it is still really effective as well. So it's still powerful even when you're not doing those charge ups. And it means that if you're in a scenario where you want to do the charged attack and then something happens, you need to dodge something or whatever, and you're just like, I'll just throw out the small attack instead to get out of there sooner, you can totally do that. So there's some nice variability there as well. Now, I'm sure you've probably put 2 and 2 together here from watching me attack, that this thing really shines against any sizable group of enemies. It's just going to shred big crowds when it's fully charged. And also, I've noticed that a lot of the time I'll charge it up and I'll wait for an enemy to get closer, and they just never see it coming for some reason. Like, maybe it's in the name. It's just because it's a shadow katana? I don't know. Either way, it seems to be pretty damn effective. And the same thing goes for bosses, really. Like, take a look at me absolutely shredding the boss health here. And if you pair that with a mimic, you are going to be unstoppable. Now, this all sounds fantastic, but this thing's number 3 on the list, not number 1 on the list. So what's the deal, right? What are the negatives? There is one pretty huge drawback here, though. So this thing uses a ton of FP with its Ash of War. So if you're not topping up really often, it's just going to be another kind of basic vanilla katana, but with really short range, which you could just find anywhere, right? And sure, to mitigate that, you could use a talisman that slowly restores FP called the Blessed Blue Dew Talisman, but that's just not going to be enough for bossing, for example. So it's not a complete fix to the problem, but it at least still kind of gets you part way. Now, the last thing to mention here on the Sword of Night is that it actually has a secret kind of bonus that not a lot of people are that aware of, I think. And this is going to throw people off a huge amount, I think, in PvP, and probably save your ass against the big shielded enemies as well, which is where katanas actually struggle sometimes. So this is a kind of unique benefit to this weapon. So in the item's description, it actually says the Ash of War cannot be guarded against. So as long as you're not being hit, you're going to have no problem landing this attack against any enemy, which is pretty neat. And like I said, if you need a full guide on how to get this, I've got one linked in the description right now. Number 2, the Dragon Hunter's Great Katana. So number 5 on our list was just a standard Great Katana, right? And this is a new weapon type brought in for Shadow of the Erdtree. Number 2 on our list here is another Great Katana, but this time it does have a unique Ash of War. And just overall, I think it's one of the most fun and powerful weapons I've used in Elden Ring in general. So as you can see, it does a huge amount of damage with its normal attacks, just like our Great Katana friend over at number 5. And the Ash of War is called a Dragon Wound Slash. And when you use it, it will do a jumping attack that imbues the katana with red dragon energy. Now, if you choose to charge it instead, it shoots out a projectile at enemies, and it has great range when it does that as well. This means you can start just about any boss fight with one of these attacks and kind of chunk the boss from the very beginning. And you can also take out a lot of the harder open world enemies with ease, I would say. I mean, I'm using that word tentatively because this is Elden Ring, but it's easier because you can just do it from a distance, and that makes this thing pretty nuts. Now, on top of that, with the jump attack, because you're jumping, you're more likely to hit an enemy in the head with either the close range attack or the projectile, and that makes it deal even more damage. And the projectile can deal collateral damage, and as an example of that, you can see here, I sliced down 4 enemies with just 1 charged attack from range. Now, not only that, but just like the Shadow Katana, the Sword of Night, you can stop charging the skill at any point, and you can just do your regular short range attack instead, so you're not forced to lock in to the full charge animation. And so you're probably wondering at this point, right? Like, does this thing have any downsides? Is it bad in any way? Like, how is it not number 1? And the only kind of caveat I would say is that you are going to want to maintain your distance against a boss. And if you can do that, you're going to go crazy against that boss. Like, you're going to do so well, but obviously that isn't always the easiest thing in the world to do. And so granted, if you get up close to them, you're still going to get some decent damage in, and it's still got bleed like the other katanas, but its real kind of proficiency, I would say, is at range, getting that massive first hit in, and I think that's where it really does shine. Now, before we get to number 1 on this list, I want to give you guys a pro tip that I think is going to make your life even easier when you're deciding which one of these to use. So we've talked about individual katanas through this video so far. We're about to talk about the final one, but I think that sometimes when you've got one katana that's good at one thing and another katana that's good at another thing, you might as well put them together. So for example, if you want the range from the Dragon Hunter and you also equip this number 1 katana that we're about to talk about to cover all the other combat scenarios in the game, you're going to have a really well-rounded kind of attack style and attack pool, and that might be the kind of key that you need to get through some of those bosses you're stuck on. Anyway, let's talk about number 1 on the list, Rakshasa's Great Katana. There is no doubt in my mind about Rakshasas being the best Great Katana in the game. So why is that the case, right? Number 1, there's a secret stat on this weapon that really elevates it above some of the other katanas. It's called Hyper Armor, and it means that you get a window where your attack cannot be interrupted. Then on top of that, it's got a unique Ash of War, like I mentioned. It's called Weed Cutter, and it means you can just spam attacks over and over again without needing to reset if an enemy attacks you. And you're also not limited by your stamina, for instance, because it barely uses any to attack, and it uses a pretty insignificant amount of FP to use Weed Cutter as well. So I would say there's basically no drawback to this, besides the one debuff, which is that you do take a little bit more damage while attacking with Weed Cutter. But if the enemy in front of you dies while you're using it, then who cares, right? And you can reallocate points from endurance and mind and put them in vigor to increase your total health, so you can keep tanking hits for as long as possible while you're using it, should you so desire. And like the other katanas, it does bleed damage. So this thing slaps, and if you want to know how to get it, I've got a guide linked on screen right now, which will explain exactly how you can do that and also get you all the other katanas. Enjoy!